Hey guys, welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Katie, and today I'm going to be talking about the 20 books that I read in August. Okay, so it's technically 22 books that I read, plus a couple Archie comic books that I don't list in my reading wrap-up, so 22 books that I read in August. It was definitely a huge reading month. I don't know how I did it because we had vacation in August, and I just don't know how I did it. Probably a lot of audiobooks. So I have my reading journal. I have a few physical copies, and the rest are going to be pictured here somewhere. So I read 3 graphic novels plus the Archie comic books. 3 graphic novels. I read 1 classic this month. I read what looks like maybe 2 YA books, a poetry book, which really surprised me. And then I did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 Christian fiction. So I will go through secular fiction first and then Christian fiction after. So let's go ahead without further ado. So I did do these by star ratings. I will put how many star ratings I have here. It might be easier than me telling you. Okay, so the first book that I read was these aren't in order of what I read, but just star ratings. So the first one was Afar by Leila Del Duca. This was a graphic novel. I think I read because of a prompt that I had last month for one of my reading games last month on Facebook, and I gave it 3 stars. It was okay. So it's about this girl who, her and her brother are pretty much left by themselves. They're kind of low teenagers to high teenage age, but their parents kind of go off and get jobs on their own. So they pretty much are left alone. And the daughter is starting to have these very weird and very vivid dreams of her being on different planets and kind of embodying these different creatures. Like she's kind of swapping bodies with these different creatures. So she's kind of living their lives as she dreams during the night. She kind of gets afraid to go to sleep because there's some pretty terrifying ones that she doesn't want to be involved with. But then there's one where something happens where there's this guy that's with her on this other planet and he's hurt and she's trying to go back to him to try to figure out what's going on. Now, I did really like that part. I liked the artwork, but then it felt like it should be part of a series, but this book was written like back in 2017, I think, and there's been nothing since. So I feel like it ended on a weird, like, should be cliffhanger almost. And then there was also a part where, like, they started talking about, like, yoga and stuff like that. So I started getting into stuff that I don't personally like. So I was like, that's why I kind of got down. There was only, like, 1 scene of that, but I'm like, you really didn't need that. Like, not at all in that book. It didn't have anything really to do with the story. I didn't feel like it added anything to it. So that's why I only got 3 stars. It might have been 4, but because of that, it got down to a 3. I finally read Scaramouche by Raphael Sabatini. I've had this on my bookshelf. This is the oldest book on my bookshelves to date. I've had this on my bookshelves for about 12 years now, and I got it when I was in college after seeing the movie. I love the movie. This is actually the movie cover. I don't normally go for movie covers, but this and The Princess Bride, I wanted the movie cover. So I got this copy and finally read it. I read this with my friend Tiffany over at Beautiful Minutia. I will link her channel down below. But we read it together, and I think we rated it the same. I did have it at 3.5, but I ended up lowering it on Goodreads to 3 stars because as it settled in, I don't think it was any more than that. So this is about Andre Moreau, and his best friend ends up getting into a duel in the beginning of the book and ends up dying. And so he ends up taking his best friend's kind of, not persona, but kind of taking his ideals and his visions about society and stuff and kind of putting it on himself, even though he really doesn't feel that way. But he kind of wants a little bit of revenge on his friend's killer, as well as kind of also like having to be on the run because he was kind of involved with that. So he ends up being in this theater troupe and being involved with the theater troupe. And I think that was Tiffany's and my favorite part, was the theater acting and seeing behind the scenes and him growing into this great actor and stuff on stage and traveling around the country. And so I really like that part. I also agree that the beginning was very, very slow, so it did take me a while to get into it too. But because I had that connection with the movie and I love the movie so much that it got 3 stars because I kind of had that connection as well. Okay, next I read Mockingjay by Suzanne Collins. This is the 3rd book in the Hunger Games. I ended up giving it 3 stars. My ratings have actually gone with the movies. It's kind of funny. The first book and first movie I really enjoyed. I think I gave them kind of both 4 stars. Second book, second movie is actually my favorite. I ended up giving both. They're my favorite in the trilogy. And then the 3rd book and the 3rd movie was my least favorite. So 3 stars. It was still good, but I just felt like this one was a little bit more political heavy, I felt like, and some parts just felt like there was too much going on. So if you don't know what this is about, which I'm sure most of you kind of have the gist of it, but it's about this girl, Katniss, who in the first book, she ends up pretty much giving herself as tribute during the Hunger Games because a number gets picked from each sector in the area, and it's a fight to the death pretty much. They go into this arena type place and they end up fighting until only one survivor is left. So her sister gets picked and Katniss ends up deciding to take her place. And so yeah, the 3rd book was just, I feel like, too much political, but also kind of had almost too much going on. Like book 1 and 2, you kind of had like this one plot, this one thing going on, maybe a few things. Then like the 3rd book just felt like overly a lot to me. Like there was different areas they were in, a lot of traveling, a lot of doing. So it wasn't my favorite in the series, but I do plan on reading the whatever it's called, the prequel, which is about snow. So I'm excited to finally get that quintet or whatever 4-book series is called finally finished. All right, so the next book that I read was a poetry book, and again, I grabbed this one for some prompt on one of my Facebook groups for reading, and it's called Somebody Give This Heart a Pen by Sophia Thacker. Never heard of her. I guess she is pretty famous in like the poetry realm, and I gave 4 stars. There was definitely poems that I liked more and some that I liked less. I think I liked the ones in the beginning of the book a little bit better than the ones at the end. So I think these are all, because I feel like the first part of the book was talking about giving strength to your person as a whole, like kind of sharing like trying to help somebody else, versus like the second half of the book was kind of talking about her own life, I guess. And I just felt more connected with the poetry that was trying to help the reader versus poetry that was talking about the author, if that makes sense. But I did really like it, and surprisingly, like, it's not a Christian book, but she actually does talk about praying and talks about God in the book. So that really surprised me, and I was very happily surprised. So it was definitely interesting. I have not read poetry in a really long time, so it was very short too. I think it was like a 2-hour audiobook, so it was nice to just relax and listen to some poetry. Okay, the next 2 that I read volume 3 and 4 of Those Not So Sweet Boys by Yoko Nogiri, and I gave both 4 stars. These have been my favorites so far. They're just really cute, sweet manga series. I have never read manga before this past year, so I'm fairly new to the genre, but I really am enjoying these. I think they're sweet. It's about this girl who's very shy in school, and she has a job that she's not supposed to have. It's supposed to be, her school's supposed to kind of agree with the job before she actually takes a job, so she doesn't really know that, but her family needs money because she's on a scholarship. So the dean or the head of the school finds out and tells her she can't have this job, but she brings back these boys who left the school. They were on suspension and they were supposed to come back. They never did. So he says, if you can bring the boys back, you can stay in school and we'll find a job for you that the school agrees on. So she does, and she ends up becoming friends with these 4 boys and kind of integrating them back into school and trying to get them to be not necessarily popular, but a lot of the kids had like that fear factor toward them, or like they were like, some were wealthy, some kind of have like a a weird history with their family. So like kind of like a dark history with their family. So like a lot of the students really didn't know how to act around them. So they kind of integrate back into the school. And I just really loved the main character, how she befriends these 4 boys. And I just really like their friendship dynamic. And there's almost like a love triangle going on, but like kind of halfway, I guess. But I've been enjoying it, and I can't wait to read. I think I'm on volume 6 now, actually, because I finished volume 5 in September. And then I read The Tarnished by E.S. Christensen. This is the second book in the Blameless series. I have book 1 on my shelf, and I gave this one 4 stars. It wasn't as good as the first one. The first one has been one of my absolute favorite fantasy books ever that I've read, and so I read The Tarnished. Still really enjoyed it. I just think that I don't know if I can say too much about this book because it is the second in the series. But in the first book, Princess Brianna, her family gets assassinated and somebody else takes over the throne. And so she ends up having to hide away and escape. And there's 3 men who end up finding her and kind of become her, like, her adopted uncles. They kind of teach her how to train to be kind of like the new queen of the kingdom when she's able to get back her throne. So I really enjoy it. There is definitely magic in here, but I feel like it's not super strong. They have element magic. So like when they do like a deed of, I was gonna say like a good deed, but it's like not a good deed, but like a selfless act. That's what it is. When they do a selfless act and not like realizing that they did it or whatever, when they do a selfless act, they get a, they're known as the Blameless. So when they do a selfless act, they get a power from one of the elements for like either earth, wind, the sun or whatever. So it's not super magical because I have a very discerning spirit. I didn't really feel anything reading these books, so that was good. But I did really enjoy it. I think I honestly enjoyed more the characters in this book than the plot itself. That's probably why I got more of a 4-star feel to this than a 5-star. But definitely the characters. I wish there was more humor in this book. Like the first one had a lot of humor in it. This one had more of like, we gotta hunker down and try to get back your kingdom type of feel. But I mean, that's important too. So the 3rd book should be coming out hopefully within the next year or so. I might be one of the first readers for the 3rd book. I don't know. I talked about it with the author if she wanted me to read it, but I'm excited to see where this book goes because I really want to get into the 3rd book as soon as I possibly can because I am enjoying this series as a whole. Okay, now we're getting into all the Christian fiction that I read for the month of August. So I had 1-star this month. This was kind of a sad 1-star because it was part of a book box that I received, and it was called The Crush by Allison Kennedy. Personally, this book just was not for me personally. Yeah, it was 1-star for me. I really wanted to like it, but it's a YA book. So it's about this girl in school, and she befriends this one boy, and she thinks like, this is it, he's the one. And somehow it has to do a lot with grief. This book really deals with grief. It does mention thoughts of suicide as well in this book. And during the events where she meets this boy and ends up starting to fall in love with him, his dad kind of, I believe, takes off and leaves. And so he's kind of has that grief of like, I'm no good, why did he leave type of feelings. And so throughout the book, I honestly felt so depressed reading this book. I really didn't feel like there was any hope in it. And honestly, I felt like maybe like that's the way the author was going. Like for some people, they feel like they have no hope, and others try to really help them, but they really, really can't, unfortunately. And so I just honestly felt like there was no hope in this book, and it was just like sadness upon sadness. There was like no breather for anything. It was just like a bad event after a bad event. And yeah, that can happen in our real lives. Has happened to me, has happened to you. But I just felt like there was no reprieve, no anything. So like, yeah, it was so depressing. I very, very multiple times was tempted to DNF that book, but I did push through, but it was only 1-star. I could not do it. And it's actually off my bookshelves. That's why I'm not showing it to you. Okay, the next book that I read was the Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. Don't be mad, I only gave it 2 stars. There's a couple reasons why. I listened to the audiobook. I felt like I could have gotten more out of it if I read it physically and read it slower. And the Screwtape Letters was mixed with a short story later that was like called something about Screwtape makes a speech or something. I did not like that one. I was confused. I was like blanking out as I was listening to the audiobook. I was bored throughout it. And if it didn't have that in it, the Screwtape Letters probably would have been closer to 3 stars without that. But I just could not get into it, unfortunately. And maybe I'll read it again in the future. And I sure will be trying other C.S. Lewis's nonfiction books as well. But this one just didn't hit me very well, just because I couldn't get into it. And I just, also because, like, I'm not a huge, like, I felt like almost, it was kind of funny. It's not nonfiction, but that's the way I kind of took it almost. So, like, I don't like nonfiction, but yeah, it kind of felt like that. If that makes sense. It's not. It's fiction, but like, just the way C.S. Lewis wrote this, it definitely could be read as a nonfiction. So the Screwtape Letters, if you don't know about it, I didn't really know too much about it really at all, but Screwtape is the main character's name, and it's pretty much one of Satan's workers, and he is writing to another worker, and he's telling him all these things about this man who's a Christian and saying, listen, we got to get this man away from God. Here's a few tips. Here's how we can do it. How's he reacting to these situations that we put him in and stuff? And so, yeah, as I said, it kind of reads as a nonfiction because, like, that's how it is in real life. So, yeah, so that concept I really was intrigued by. And so I definitely felt connected to some parts in the story. And I feel like if I took it more slower in the future, I feel like I would get more out of it. All right, the next book that I read was A Girl's Guide to the Outback by Jessica Kate. Unfortunately, I only gave this one 2 stars. I was really looking forward to this book too. I love books set in Australia. I love contemporary romances, but this one I just felt so disconnected from the characters. I just felt like I don't know, the relationship between the 2 characters, I just couldn't really see. Like, I don't know, I just felt like they weren't really a couple to me. I don't know. Like, the romance was kind of unbelievable to me a little bit. And also, like, I was listening to the audiobook, which was probably a bad decision, because it's one of those books where they switch points of view in the middle of a chapter, and they don't tell you who's who. So I had a hard time keeping track of who was who at first, and I was like, okay, who are we reading again? So that was a little bit tough for me, and yeah, as I said, I just didn't really dive with the romance that well. So this one is about a girl who, she's working for a ministry to help underprivileged kids and kids with family problems. And so they have this ministry, and she wants to create it bigger and make it larger. And the pastor who's working with the kids, he's like, I don't want it to be bigger. I want to concentrate on the little community that we have right now. And she kind of goes over his head to the head of the committee, and he pretty much says, I'm done. My family really needs me, because he just got a text actually from Australia that they need him back at the farm because the farm's kind of dying and they really need his help with funds and stuff. So he ends up deciding to go back to Australia, and her boss says, we really need him back to work with the kids. So she ends up traveling to Australia to try to get him back to the US. And so it was okay, but as I said, it was kind of an unbelievable romance. I didn't really like the characters, so it wasn't for me. But I might try one of her books in the future. I read Lost in the Caverns, the 3rd book in the Dreamkeeper saga by Kathryn Butler. I got this one from Crossway, and this is the biggest book in the series so far. It's like over 400 pages almost. So it is a hefty boy there. This is a soon-to-be 4-book series. I gave this one 3.5. I think this is the lowest rating I gave these books. I liked the second half of the book better than the first half. But in this series, we're following Lily, and she's going to this place called the Realm, and it's kind of like a magical realm, kind Chronicles of Narnia feel a little bit. And this is a Christian middle grade series. So we follow her on her adventures in each book. And the first two kind of felt like standalones. This one, you kind of have a connection with characters from past books. So you kind of have to read them in order because of that. It's been a while since I read the second book. So I struggled a little bit in the beginning. But like the first, I would say third of the book, I felt like nothing was going on. There was like no action or anything. Like she's kind of tasked to take care of this prince of this kingdom in the realm, and she pretty much needs to babysit him while he disappears and is kind of wandering through the caverns down below. And so that's pretty much like the first third of the book is her just kind of going through the caverns trying to locate him. And I was just like, there's nothing going on really. And then after that we kind of get a little bit more why he's going into the cavern. So he's looking for kind of relatives in his family that he thinks he might have, because he and his sister are the only ones left of their kingdom. And so there's some place that has, I'm not sure what it's called, but there's like mist and fog in this area. And he's like, I know that my people's family is down there. And so he ends up going down there, and they end up discovering these weird creatures down there that kind of kidnap them. And they end up meeting, like, I don't know if they're goblins or something, but they're kind of along that line down there in the caverns and stuff. And my favorite parts, honestly, were, my favorite character was a rat. I don't remember his name. And there's also a bat and a rat. They're my favorite characters in the books. So I honestly felt like the animals were my favorites. The rabbit too. Like all the animal characters, I am here for the animal characters. So I wouldn't really be interested in reading the fourth book. But if you like kind of like just a light fantasy read that are clean for children, definitely older children. I mean, this is a 400-page book. I mean, I might have read it when I was a kid, but 400 pages is a lot of pages. So I read the first book in the, I forgot what it's called. Can't remember. And I can't read it. But it's The Rose Legacy by Kristen Heitzman. This is actually one of my friends, Holly, over at Lovely Day with Holly. It's her favorite Kristen Heitzman series. And mine is actually another series. I read the first book. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. It was okay to me, but it did take a long time to get into it. I still think the other series, the Rocky Mountain Legacy series, is my favorite by her, but I still need to read the other two in this series to see if I have a new favorite maybe. But this one is about a girl, I believe it's like late 1800s, I think. But she ends up taking what money she has, and she's like, I want to go off on my own. Her boyfriend kind of dumped her for somebody else, and so she's like, I just want to get out of here. So she ends up going to the west. She bought a house in this little town, and she ends up going and finding out that somebody else is bunking down in her house. And somebody says that they have squatters' rights, and then somebody else comes in and says, I bought that house too. So she's trying to figure out what's going on. This kind of sleazy guy ends up saying, hey, I'll give you a job. And so she's kind of like this secretary and stuff. So there's a bunch of things going on with the house. There's things going on around the town that are kind of mysterious, things that are happening. So I did enjoy it. I'm definitely going to continue. I don't know if I'll continue this month or not, but I do want to read and see what happens next, because there is a little bit of a romance, but not too much in the first book. And then I read Fairest of Heart by Witemeyer. I gave this book 4 stars. I also have a review for it, so I'll link it down below. I will link all of my book reviews that I've done in the past month down below in the description box if you want to check out more details. So this is a Snow White retelling set in the South, and we're following Penelope Snow, and she works for kind of this, well, evil queen type lady who works for this theater troupe. And so she ends up trying on a dress and trying to get it fitted for the lady who's the head of the theater troupe. And she ends up getting caught and basically is telling her to get out of the dress. And I can't remember, I think, oh, it's because her position in the theater is kind of being threatened as well, that she tells her kind of henchmen to take her out into the woods and kill her pretty much. I mean, it's Snow White. But then, of course, the 7 old men in the story who represent the 7 dwarfs find her, along with the prince of the book, and they end up taking her to their home in the woods, and She kind of takes care of the house, and I just honestly, I was here only for the 7 old men. I loved their characters. I loved how they represented each of the 7 dwarfs. You could definitely tell which one was which dwarf, and I love their characters, and yeah, I was here for them. And then I read the last book in Liz Johnson's newest series. It was called Summer in the Spotlight, and I gave this one 4 stars. It was my favorite in the series. The first 2 I just felt were kind of slow for me. They weren't my favorite contemporary romances, and I was not going to pick up the 3rd book. I was actually planning on DNFing the series, but then what made me change my mind? I can't remember. I don't remember, but I ended up going ahead and picking it up. I think, because Tony Shiloh has a year-round reading challenge on her Facebook group, and one of the prompts was to read a book set on the beach, and this one wasn't. But I thought it might, but it wasn't. But I read it, and I really enjoyed it, actually. I gave it 4 stars. It's about this very, very shy and almost insecure man. He's very unsure about himself, and a lot of things in his past kind of have to do with that. I won't spoil anything. But he's very quiet. He works for the school, and he meets this lady who comes back to the school after being away for years, and he had a crush on her in high school. And so she comes back, and she wants to get the theater back. Man, I read a lot of theater-related books this month. I just realized that. This is the 3rd or 4th book I read with theater in it. But she wants to pick up the theater and bring it back to life in her old hometown. But then something happens where she's not able to do that anymore. Funding is no longer going to be involved with that. The theater in the school is pretty much it's no longer going to happen because the committee met. They said, nope, we're not going to fund it anymore. So she's like, what am I going to do? I came back here specifically to help with the theater, and it's gone now. So she is going to end up trying to fund it on her own through donations, and she gets the help of the guy who works at the school. She's like, hey, can you help me? And he's like, sure. That's all he pretty much says is 1-word sentences to her for quite a while until he gets used to her again, and then they start having longer conversations. And I really liked their romance. I thought it was really sweet, that both of them together, and I really liked our main hero. So definitely a sweet romance. And if you were unsure about the first 2 books, pick up the 3rd one. Even if you don't read the other 2, the 3rd one was definitely worth it. It was very sweet. I read Kimberly Woodhouse's newest release, 26 Below, which is her first book in her Alaskan Cyber Hunter series. Second book comes out, I think, in wintertime, I think January or February, and I really enjoyed this book. So this is set in Alaska, and Darcy has just gotten a job at the Emergency Operations Center in Fairbanks. And so she's pretty much put in charge of if there's any any natural disasters, or specifically if there's any cyber crimes that are going to happen in the area where the power is going to go out. And she's in charge of a huge area in Alaska. And so she ends up working with this guy who's a cybersecurity specialist named Jason. And so something happens where this older woman, she is trying to tell people in the city, she's trying to find who can help, because she found out something that once it hits 26 below, people are going to die and something's going to happen, a huge catastrophe. So they're trying to figure out what's going on. Every time they get close to this older lady, she just disappears. She's gone. And so they're trying to find her while also trying to set up a system to stop cyber terrorists from happening and stuff. But then something happens when it hits 26 below, and now they're really in trouble because they haven't got their systems completely up. They're a new company that's trying to help the community, and so they're getting backlash from people. They're getting backlash from naturalist groups and stuff. And she's like, I have nothing to do with naturalist groups. Why are you going against me? So yeah, there's a lot going on. I'm excited to continue the series because we figured out some things in this book, but then there's also an underlying mystery but it kind of continues into the next book, so I can't wait to get to the second book. I also read Cold Pursuit by Nancy Mehl. A lot of cold books this past couple weeks. This is her first book in her Ryland and St. Clair book series. The next one comes out, I think, again in January or February, I think. But this one follows two ex-FBI agents. One is named River and one is named Tony. And they were partners in the Are they partners? I didn't think they were partners. Or maybe they were. Oh yeah, they were. But something happens on their first case. This isn't a spoiler because it happens in the first couple of pages. But things happen where their case really goes wrong. Something happens. And so Ryland, she ends up having, or River, well, that's her last name, Ryland. But River ends up pretty much, I think she's the one who has to quit the FBI because she has PTSD. And her partner also has some health issues due to their last case. So he's kind of decided, you know, I want a break. I'm going to quit the FBI too. So he ends up tasking River with, hey, let's set up a PI, private investigation place, and try to help people. So they do that. And then this lady ends up coming saying her teenage son disappeared 4 years ago and was never discovered. She just wants closure. And so they end up taking on the case, and it is far bigger than just a missing kid. So a lot of things happen. And again, in this one, there is another underlying mystery throughout. So I have to get to the second book because I think this one did end. I think both actually ended on a little bit of a cliffhanger. So I will, yeah, the last paragraph ended on a cliffhanger. So I will have to like reread the cliffhanger to catch up in the second book. Next two books that I read the duology No Ocean Too Wide and No Journey Too Far by Carrie Taransky. And thank you to my friend Jane over at Jane Reads for suggesting these books and making me read them because I did enjoy them. I gave the first book 5 stars and the second book 4 stars. So I really enjoyed it. These are 2 historical fiction books where in the first book we're following these kids. I think there's 3. There's 3 kids, and then one, the older girl, is away working a job as a maid. And so the 3 kids are all by themselves. A few are a little bit older. I think they're like between 12 and 14, I think. But their mom ends up getting very, very sick, and she can't work anymore. So she ends up going to the hospital. And the kids are all alone. And so a policeman catches the brother, and he basically was stealing a loaf of bread because they were very hungry. And so he's caught, and he says, listen, I'm either taking your kid or your brother to juvie hall, or that equivalent of it in that era, or I'm going to have to bring all 3 of you into like a foster home care house. And they're like, we can't be separated because our mom needs us after she gets out of the hospital. So they end up doing that and somehow get confused to where they think their mom has passed away. And so they end up being shipped off to America, or Canada. They're being shipped off to Canada to have new foster parents and adopted parents. So they end up going there, and their sister is trying to rescue them throughout the story. So I really, really enjoyed the historical era, and just that like so depressing of a time where you don't know where your parents are, and you're put into the system, and even if you are the parent, you need to pay like a certain amount of money for their boarding before you can take them out of that foster system. And it's like, it was really sad time, that's for sure. But I did really enjoy the series. Next, I read Counterfeit Legacy by Kate Moser, or Moser. I don't know how to pronounce her name. But I gave it 4.5 stars. I loved this book. And the author gave me a copy. Sad to say, she probably gave it to me like 10 months ago. I try to get to a lot of my review books, but sometimes I just have so many books on my plate. But I really, really enjoyed this one. So this is a dual timeline book where in the beginning we're seeing this woman, and she's at home and a tornado hits and a tree falls in her house. Nothing is extremely damaged except for like the wall, and where her great grandfather's vest is in like this glass case. And so it ends up breaking, and she ends up taking the vest out to make sure it's okay. And she ends up just staring at it like all night while she's at her home. And she discovers that there's a hidden note in the pocket, like behind the stitches. And thankfully the stitches were kind of newer stitches. So she ends up going in there, getting the note, and it says something like, I can't remember exact words, but it says, "He doesn't know, meet me at midnight." So she's like, that's pretty random. So she has no idea what it is. I mean, it's her great grandfather. She never knew him. So she also has like some secret that she's keeping hidden in the beginning of the book as well. And so she's on the hunt for this secret, like what could possibly be in this note. So she ends up telling her grandmother, and her grandmother gets extremely agitated about that note. She says, "Give me that note. I need to have it now, like immediately." And she's like, "Okay, Grandma, I'll bring it." So this has a lot to do with family secrets. It does talk about extramarital relations as well in the book, but I did feel like the author did a really great job at tackling these issues about secrets and family legends and stuff. And so she did a good job of like talking about like forgiveness and faith, and I just felt like it was woven very well. And there's also a sequel too, which I will go ahead and have to purchase either the ebook or the physical copy. I don't know yet because they're almost the same price. But yeah, I'm very excited to read the sequel to that one. I think it's gonna be great. And then we're on to my top 3 of the month, which were all 5 stars. The first one is Head in the Clouds by Kathryn Witemeyer. I loved this one. I really did. So I read this one on vacation. I listened to the audiobook and I just flew through it. It was so good. So we're following this girl who, really heartbreaking beginning for sure, but she falls in love with this man as she's a teacher, and he's kind of like a traveling salesman, if you know that type. And so he ends up saying, you know, I gotta go home. I'm no longer traveling for my company or whatever, or no longer gonna be out this way. So she's like, well, I'm gonna prove my love for him. Like, he doesn't seem to like see that like I'm willing to move where he's moving. So she ends up picking up, moving, taking her horse that she has, and moving to wherever he is. Well, thankfully, the first day she gets there, she ends up finding him with his wife. And so she's pretty much like, what am I gonna do? Like she can't go home. She doesn't have any family or anything. And so she's like, what am I gonna do? Like, I moved my entire stuff here. I quit my job as a teacher, and she has no idea what to do. So she ends up seeing a notice for a governess to take care of this man's child in Texas. And so she ends up going to his like solicitor or lawyer or something to apply for the job. And so he thinks she's perfect for the job. So he's like, I'm taking 2 ladies out. I think that same afternoon. He wasn't gonna offer the job to anybody else, but he said he'll take her too, and the man at the ranch can decide who he wants as the governess. So she goes with the other 2. The other 2 are definitely not the one for the job. So obviously she gets the job as the governess. And the man who owns the ranch, actually his daughter is not technically his daughter. It's actually a stranger's daughter. I don't think it's a spoiler alert, but I thought it was a cute part of the story, so I wanted to share it. But as he was traveling from England to the US on a ship, the little girl's mother ends up passing away and ends up saying, will you take care of my daughter? Will you be her main guardian? Because she has no one else. And so he ends up saying, all right, I'll take care of her. So he ends up becoming her foster dad and adopts her. And so the governess comes and come to find out that the daughter does have an uncle who's trying to make it out that his sister-in-law was crazy, and to put her into with a complete stranger on the boat, even though the captain was a witness, said that she was competent before she passed. But the guy wants her for scrupulous reasons. Like, there's other reasons why he wants her, and nothing gross. But he wants her for reasons. That's all I say. But I loved the romance between the characters. It was definitely like, you do see references to Jane Eyre and Mr. Rochester throughout the book. I just thought it was really sweet and I loved it. And yeah, so if you want a sweet historical romance, definitely check out that one. Okay, and then the last 2 books that I actually have physical copies of. Yay! So which one should I talk about first? This one or this one? This one. Let's do this one. So I think the other one was my favorite of the month, but it was close. So this is Where It Ends by Cindy K. Sproles, and this is a historical fiction book. I actually got this book back in May, I think, from Baker Publishing. It took me that long to read it because every time I started it like 3 times. The first chapter got me. It's like, it was so depressing. I was like, is the whole book going to be like this, God? Because I can't do it right now. But I read it, and I'm so glad I finally did. I think I read it at a point that I could handle it because I knew it was going to be heart-wrenching and so much going on, but I loved it. I gave it 5 stars. It was great. It was actually closer to 4.5, but the characters pushed it up to a 5. So we're following Minerva, and her husband ends up marrying her when she's quite young. I think she's like 14 or 15, I think. 14. And so she ends up getting married, and they end up moving to like the side of the mountain. No connection with anybody, no connection with her family anymore. And so they end up living an isolated life on the side of the mountain. And then he ends up passing away. I think they're like in their 80s. And, I mean, not that old, maybe like 70s. But he says, keep my secret. Before he passes away, keep my secret and don't tell anyone about the gold. And so she's like, okay. So there's a box that she has never opened, and that's the secret in the box. So she has never opened it. She doesn't know what the secret is, if there's gold, if there's not gold. So she ends up pretty much saying, I'll keep your secret. So she kind of has that burden on her heart, like, how long do I keep this secret from going on? And I loved Minerva so much. And so this reporter comes up one day saying that there's hints of a gold story, and her husband was involved in something. And so she's like, I know nothing, get off my land. She's pretty much this crotchety old lady living alone. She's now in her 90s. But the reporter guy ends up sticking around and helping her with the ranch and becoming friends with her. And he's kind of wanting a little bit more than just the gold story. And so it was so sweet, and I loved the characters' friendship, and you have to read it. The characters were absolutely great. And the last book that I have is Positively Penelope by Paperbacks, which is her second book in the Skimar series. And I love this one so much. It was my favorite book of the month. I loved it so much. I did really enjoy Authentically Izzy, but I think I only gave that one 4 stars. This one was 5 stars. I loved it. So this one is mostly, again, no, actually, this one's not told in complete letters. Like, there's a lot of parts in this book that don't have letters compared to the other one. But there is still, like, text messages and emails to her family back in the U.S. This one is following Penelope, and she's the cousin of the first book, Izzy. But she ends up getting an internship at this very small theater on Skimar Island, where Izzy's fiance is from. So she ends up going, and this little theater is pretty much, again, another theater book. What is up with the theater books this month? I just realized that again. Anyways, so this theater, again, is kind of losing funds. It's not doing so great. And so she's like, I want to do my best while I'm here to get it back up and running. And so she ends up meeting this guy whose name is Matthias. Oh, I remembered that. I surprised myself. But she ends up meeting Matt at the airport. And she doesn't know that his family owns the theater when she meets him, because his daughter was like running around the airport and couldn't find her dad. So she's trying to help locate him. And he pretty much thinks that Penelope's like trying to steal his daughter away. And she's like, no. And he's like this very grumpy, grouchy man in the beginning. And I just loved him. I just loved him. I don't know why, but I love a grumpy sunshine romance. And just Matt's growth through the entire book was just great. I love the way he blossomed and opened up to Penelope, and I just loved it. So we're following both of them as they're trying to get the theater back up and running, and there's sabotage happening at the theater too and stuff, so we're trying to figure out what's going on there, but I just loved it. I thought it was great. So yeah, if you were unsure again about Authentically Izzy and just, thought it was okay, pick up this one. It's good. There's no like fandom references like Lord of the Rings, because I know a few people who got lost with like that fandom aspect of it. So pick up this one. There's no fandom. I mean, unless you, yeah, there is fandom of Julie Andrews. But other than that, it's such a sweet romance, and it's one of my favorite character pairings to date. Really cute. All right, so those are all the books that I read. I don't have everything physical, so those are the ones that I read. Let me know what you read in August. Did you read anything fun, anything good, anything that was really rotten and terrible? Let me know. I'd love to know all those things. Did you read any of these and enjoyed them? So I hope you have a wonderful day. I am hot and I am tired. Wow, this video was longer than I thought. So I hope you all have a wonderful, blessed day, and I will see you all in the next video.